Next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer? Here it is.
Dum 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 dum.
And it is the dumbest bill in America. And it is, you won't believe it, establishing the California Condom Police. You heard that correctly, I'm sad to say. The dumbest bill in America this episode is establishing the California Condom Police. Sponsored by Democrat Assembly member Cristina Garcia. Of course, it's from California. She's from California. She does identify as a woman, by the way. There's no doubt about that, and you'll hear more about that shortly. Well, the sponsor is advocating for this idea that there should be, I guess, a condom police, when you're in the act of making love with your significant other, that basically California is going to get in the middle and decide. So I'm going to have to read what this bill does first so that you can fully understand. So in USA Today, California moves to be the first state to outlaw stealthing or removing a condom during sex. Apparently that's a thing, stealthing. Now, imagine that your state legislature decides to get involved in this, right? Talk about getting involved in your bedroom. California moves to be the first state to outlaw stealthing or removing a condom. California lawmakers moved to make the state the first to outlaw stealthing, which is removing a condom without permission during intercourse. Legislators sent Governor Gavin Newsom a bill on Tuesday, adding that the act to the state's civil definition of sexual battery. It makes it illegal to remove the condom without obtaining verbal consent. But it doesn't change the criminal code. Instead, it would amend the civil code so that a victim could sue the perpetrator for damages, including punitive damages. Democrat Assemblywoman Cristina Garcia has been pushing for the legislation since 2017, when a Yale University study said acts of stealthing were increasing against both women and gay men. Her original bill attempted to make it a crime, but legislative analysts said at the time that the act could already be considered a misdemeanor or sexual battery, even if it isn't specifically referenced in the criminal code. But the analysts said it is rarely prosecuted, if only because of the difficulty in proving that a perpetrator acted intentionally instead of accidentally. So let's read that again. So this is really the crux of the bill, right? So the legislative analysts in California, these are the civil servants who have to explain to you what the bill does, and many times provide you background about existing legislation that might conflict with that bill or what this legislation would ultimately do, and some consequences. Sometimes they write that. They try to stay, usually the civil servants try to stay out of the political side of it. But these particular civil servants in California, when trying to explain the bill, said, well, the analysts, they said this kind of activity is rarely prosecuted because it's difficult to prove that the perpetrator actually intentionally removed their condom. So how do you, so can you imagine, podcast listeners, you're a judge and you're in a court and this case comes before you and you got, a plaintiff and a defendant, and the plaintiff is suing the defendant for $1 million because the defendant allegedly took off his condom. And the plaintiff says, he took it off. The judge is like, well, how do you know he took it off? This is why the bill is so stupid, of course, among other things, because it's California establishing the California Condom Police and getting between you and someone else in the privacy of your home. And it's just absurd. Well, don't take my word for it. The sponsor is a nut anyway. The sponsor in the past, it's a few years ago, had a bill to end the tax on tampons. So obviously you can tell this sponsor is she's hyper interested in people's private parts. I'm just going to say this sponsor is Democrat Assembly member Cristina Garcia. So this bill, of course, is now on Governor Gavin Newsom's desk. It's the California Condom Police, but she had a previous bill to end the tax on tampons. So she's obviously very interested in your private parts. probably more so. And we're going to get to that in a minute. Well, we have a clip on that, and here it is.
We've been taught not to talk about our periods. We've been taught to hide it. We've been taught that it's shameful. This is just biology. It's something that happens every month on a regular basis. It's something a lot of us deal with for 40 years of our lives. And so it's time we come out of the shadows and we end this tax on tampons.
So just a few years ago, she was, advocating for, the civil rights issue of our time, getting rid of the tax on tampons. I mean, she's hyper into, because that was Assemblywoman Garcia. She's hyper into your private parts. And, according to the news, this is just one more step towards gender equity. We have a second clip about this tampon tax, which tells you a lot about who this Assemblywoman is. And this, of course, we're going to talk about the tampon tax in a minute. Anyway, here's the clip.
I'm doing this because I'm tired of being taxed for being a woman.
Garcia is pushing Assembly Bill 1561, a bipartisan effort to end the tax on tampons and take one more step towards gender equity.
What we're trying to do is make sure that our tax code is gender neutral. And so we're trying to eliminate the tax on all menstrual products, pads, tampons, cups, and sponges. And so it's the only product of its sort in our tax code that's specific to a gender, and we get taxed every month for 40 years of our lives for being women.
So she sounds like she's kind of an angry person, just saying, and she's hyper focused at the same time on, as I said, people's private parts, because there she is there. You just heard her advocating for her no tampon tax. And then now she's advocating for the California condom police. So I see a trend here in Assemblywoman Garcia's moves, right? So don't take my word for it. I have more proof about how obsessed she is with your private parts. Here's Assemblywoman Christina Garcia and the news media talking about how she had multiple sexual harassment charges against her by men. Okay, so talk about someone who is not just hyper-focused on her policy decisions on private parts, but also she's hyper-focused in the workplace as well. We have that clip. You won't believe it. Here it is.
A man who worked as a field rep for Assemblywoman Garcia back in 2014, now filing a new harassment complaints against her. In it, the former employee says Garcia fired him after he turned down her request to play a high school kissing game at a fundraiser.
And he's on the floor. She's sitting next to him with a bottle in her hand, and she makes a comment they should be playing spin the bottle.
Attorney Dan Gillian says his client refused to play spin the bottle with his then boss, Assemblywoman Christina Garcia, but claims he paid a price.
That's when he felt as though his days were numbered and that he was being targeted.
Was he being targeted? How long after that was he fired?
Well, it was a few months. It was a few months later. The reasons why employers oftentimes wait a little bit is because if they fire him right away, it's just all the more obvious.
In a complaint filed with the state, his client accuses the Me Too advocate of using vulgar language, discussing topics inappropriate for the workplace, and showing herself to be vindictive in nature. But Garcia's former chief of staff says the former staffer's complaints are totally false, telling the SAC-B the staffer was warned for not doing his job and fired when his work didn't improve. It's the second formal accusation filed against Garcia. Another former employee claims she groped him at a softball game.
So the assembly member, Christina Garcia, who put in the California Condom Police bill, also had multiple sexual harassment charges against her over the years. Some of them by aides, people that actually work for her in her office. And one aide in particular said, well, I was with her and she wanted to play spin the bottle. And he's like, I don't want to play spin the bottle with you. You're my boss. And she's like, well, you're going to play spin the bottle whether you like it or not. And so he denied her access, to, I guess, what she wanted. And so as a result, I guess she put in the California Condom Police, It's like, it sure sounds like a hate crime to me by Christina Garcia. And then another guy was like, well, I was with her at an event and I worked for her and she was groping me. I mean, so obviously this woman has some issues. Okay. And her issues, rather than being acted out in the bedroom, which would be the appropriate place between consenting adults, she's decided to act it out in the legislature. And so one way, I mean, the producer here, Christopher Hopkins, said, well, what about women who are on birth control. I mean, what if this particular bill were used as a way of trying to extract money out of people? I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of things. I'm not saying that this doesn't happen. This stealthing thing doesn't happen, podcast listeners. What I'm saying is, and the reason we do the dumbest bill in America is because of the fact that there's too much legislation trying to basically dictate every single aspect of our lives. And in this case, there's no better example. Here's legislation trying to get into our bedroom and trying to dictate, excuse the term and the pun, trying to dictate exactly what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it. And at the same time, criminalize activity where the state doesn't belong in that I'm sorry, it's not a place for the state. And this shows you too much legislation trying to dictate every single aspect of human existence. And that is precisely why we do the dumbest bill in America, because there are too many laws governing too many things, and they're taking away our freedoms. And by freedoms, I don't mean the freedom to take off your condom, right? That's not what I'm talking about, because that obviously is a freedom. That's between you and the person that you're with. Stay out of the bedroom, California. But Assembly member Christina Garcia, she gropes men. She wants to play spin the bottle. She wants to end tax on tampons. And now she wants the California condom police. And that's the dumbest bill in America.